She said it like she was commenting on the weather. Standing in our kitchen, the kitchen I paid for in the house I bought in the Nashville neighborhood she had personally chosen, my wife of 4 years looked me dead in the eye and said, "My family thinks you're a step down from Preston. I just don't want any awkwardness at the party. No apology. No stumbling over the words. Just that flat, matter-of-fact delivery. Like she was telling me the forecast called for rain, and I should probably grab an umbrella on my way out." I said, "Understood." 2 syllables. That's all she got from me. She waited. I think she expected something more, a question, an argument, some version of "what do you mean? I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I've built everything from nothing. I love you. How is that lesser?" She wanted a reaction she'd already rehearsed answers for. What she got instead was a man who had just made a very quiet, very permanent decision. I said, "You go enjoy the party." She left 2 hours later dressed in the outfit her mother had picked out for her, carrying the wine she'd bought for her brother's celebration. She kissed me on the cheek at the door. She actually kissed me on the cheek. By the time she pulled out of the driveway, I was already on the phone. And by the time she pulled back in that night, there was nothing left of me in that house but the furniture and the letter I'd left on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee maker she'd given me for Christmas. My name is Ellison Carr. I'm 43 years old. I'm an orthopedic surgeon at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee. I have repaired shattered bones, reconstructed knees for professional athletes, and spent 17 years building a practice I am genuinely proud of. And I spent 4 of those years married to a woman who smiled to my face and apparently apologized for me behind my back. This is what happened when I finally stopped trying to understand it and just walked away. Did I need to go back to the beginning? Not the love story beginning, the beginning where I missed all the signs. Because I was a trained diagnostician. I spent my entire professional life reading symptoms, connecting patterns, catching what other people overlooked. I did it every single day. I missed every sign when it came to Darcy. We met at a charity gala at the Country Music Hall of Fame. Suits and Stetson hats and open bars at $800 a plate. I was there with a colleague who'd bought a table. Darcy was there with women from her marketing firm. She was the one at the table who wasn't performing. Everyone else was slightly on, slightly aware of being seen. Darcy was just talking, laughing at something her friend said without checking to see who noticed. I noticed. We talked for 2 hours that night. She was from Brentwood, the wealthy suburb south of Nashville where subdivision names have words like estates and reserve in them, and the lawns are professionally landscaped year-round. Her father ran a commercial real estate company. Her mother chaired nonprofit boards. Her older brother was in the family business. Her ex was someone I didn't hear about until our 3rd date, and even then, only briefly. Preston Wexford. 4 generations in Tennessee. Old money in the way old money works in the South. Not flashy, but present and permanent. His grandfather had been a state senator. His father was in banking. Darcy mentioned him the way you mention a chapter you've already read and moved past. We dated 2 years. It ran its course. We're fine. I filed it away. I should have asked more questions. Instead, I was charmed. Genuinely charmed. Darcy was smart, funny in that dry, understated way I've always liked, and she asked questions about my work that weren't polite filler. She wanted to know what it felt like to do the first procedure after a long case went wrong. She wanted to know what patients said when they took their first steps after a major reconstruction. She made me feel like what I did actually mattered to someone. I was 40 years old. I'd been divorced once before, a short marriage in my early 30s that ended without children and without bitterness, just 2 people who'd grown in different directions. I was not looking for anything serious. And then I was. I proposed at the base of Chimney Rock in western North Carolina on a weekend trip in October when the mountains were doing what they do in fall. She cried. Real tears, not performed ones. I was certain of it. We married the following spring at a venue in the Tennessee countryside, rolling green hills and white tents and 200 people who seemed genuinely happy to be there. Her father shook my hand and said I was a good man. Her mother hugged me and called me son. I thought I had arrived at something solid. Okay. The first 2 years were genuinely good. I want to say that clearly because I think it's important to acknowledge that you can be inside something real and still be heading somewhere bad. The two things are not mutually exclusive. Love is not armor against a situation being quietly decided without you. The cracks were subtle. I didn't call them cracks at the time, I called them quirks. The first thing I noticed was that Darcy rarely mentioned me to her family unprompted. At dinner at her parents' house in Brentwood, the conversation moved around me like water around a stone. Randall talked business. Lynette talked about the lake house renovation. Garrett talked about whatever deal he was working. Darcy participated naturally, comfortably. And I sat there, ate the beautifully prepared food, contributed when there was an obvious opening, and otherwise just existed in the room. I told myself this was simply how their family operated. Insular, not unfriendly. Just complete unto themselves. Then I started noticing something specific. Preston's name came up at those dinners. Not frequently. Not in a pointed way. Just naturally, the way you mention someone who's woven into the fabric of a place. Preston's mother was at the gala. Preston's firm just bought that building downtown. Garrett ran into Preston at the club last week. Every single time, a small silence followed. Like everyone was subtly checking to see how I'd respond. And every single time I gave them nothing, I'd nod, say something neutral, and the conversation would move on. But the name kept coming up, and Darcy never redirected it. She never said, "Can we not?" or "Let's not talk about him." She just let it sit in the room with us. The second thing I noticed was how Darcy handled our social calendar differently, depending on the crowd. With my colleagues, other surgeons, residents, hospital administrators, she was engaged, present, proud. She'd tell people what I did with a warmth that felt completely real. But with her family circle, the Brentwood crowd, the country club orbit, something in her posture shifted. Slightly more careful. Slightly more edited. I told myself she was just code switching. Everyone does it. I told myself a lot of things. The third thing I noticed was the comparisons. Small ones. Dropped into conversations without apparent weight. Preston always sent flowers on the first day of a new job, said to no one in particular while Darcy was texting at the counter. Preston's family had a tradition of taking a trip together every fall, said wistfully during a conversation about holidays. Not weaponized. Not mean. Just dropped into the air like they had no consequence. I brought it up once about 8 months in. Calmly, I said I noticed Preston's name came up a lot in certain contexts, and I wanted to understand what that meant. Darcy looked at me with what seemed like genuine surprise. She said she didn't realize she was doing it, that it didn't mean anything, that her family had known Preston for years. He was just part of their world, the way an old neighborhood stays part of you even after you've moved. I accepted that. I shouldn't have. But I did. The invitation, or rather, the lack of one, came on a Thursday. Garrett was turning 35. A dinner party at his house in Green Hills, one of Nashville's nicest neighborhoods, streets that curve and houses that sit back behind mature oaks. About 40 people, close friends and family. I found out about it when I overheard Darcy on the phone with her mother discussing what she was going to wear. This was Wednesday night. The party was Saturday. At dinner, I mentioned it casually. Sounds like Garrett's party is this weekend. Are we doing anything before? Darcy set down her fork. That small pause, the kind that lasts only a second but carries a full conversation inside it.
I was going to talk to you about that.
She took a breath. My family has a complicated history with certain things. Preston is going to be there. I just think it might be easier if you didn't come this time. I don't want any awkwardness. I said, "What kind of awkwardness?" And that's when she said it. "My family thinks you're a step down from Preston." I just don't want any awkwardness at the party. The kitchen was very quiet after that. I could hear the refrigerator humming, a car moving slowly down our street, my own breathing, steady and even, the way I breathe in a complicated surgery when I need my hands completely still. I said, "Understood." She seemed almost relieved, like the hard part was over. "I knew you'd get it. You're always so rational about things." I said, "You go enjoy the party." Then I sat at that kitchen table for a long time after she went upstairs to plan her outfit, and I thought about what she had actually just told me. Not that her family didn't like me. People's families don't always like who their children marry. That's ordinary. That's human. What she told me was something different entirely. She had been carrying this assessment that I was a step down and she had not contested it. She hadn't said they're wrong and I've told them so. She'd said she didn't want awkwardness, which meant she had accepted their judgment, which meant that somewhere in some quiet corner of herself, she agreed with it, or at least didn't disagree strongly enough to matter. For years of marriage, and the measure of a man in that household was whether he cleared a bar set by someone whose grandfather was a senator. I went upstairs. Darcy was in the bathroom. I showered in the guest bathroom, which I almost never did. I slept in the guest room, which I had never done. I lay in the dark and made my decision. Friday, I was in the operating room by 6:30 in the morning. 3 surgeries, back to back. A femoral reconstruction on a 60-year-old man who'd been in pain for years. A 21-year-old collegiate soccer player, ACL and meniscus. A woman in her 50s with a badly deteriorated hip who had been waiting 18 months for this appointment. When you're doing what I do, you cannot be anywhere else. You cannot be in your failing marriage. You cannot be thinking about dinner parties in Green Hills. You are in that body, fixing that specific thing. And when it goes right, there is nothing in the world that feels like it. I finished my last surgery at 4:15. Showered in the attending lounge. Drove home. Darcy was getting ready. Her outfit was laid out on the bed. I could see it through the bedroom doorway as I walked past. She called out from the vanity. "There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you get hungry." Like that was sufficient. Like that was the appropriate thing to offer a man you told yesterday that your family considered him lesser. I said, "Thanks." I went into my study and made 2 calls. The first was to my attorney, not a divorce attorney, not yet, but a friend who was a partner at a firm downtown and who I trusted completely. He talked me through the general landscape for 30 minutes, calm and methodical. When we hung up, I had a clear picture of exactly where I stood. The second call was to my friend Waverly, a general contractor and one of the best people I know. I told him I needed a storage unit and some help moving things quickly and quietly. Waverly didn't ask a single unnecessary question. He said, "Text me the address. I'll bring the truck." Darcy came to my study doorway at 7 to say goodbye. She looked beautiful. She always looked beautiful. She said, "Don't wait up. These things usually run late." I said, "I won't."
She left.
Waverly arrived 20 minutes later.
We worked fast.
I am not by nature a sentimental man when it comes to objects. I know what matters to me, and I took those things. My books, not all of them, just the ones I'd carried from apartment to apartment through residency. The photograph of my parents that sat on the bookshelf in my study. The watch my father gave me when I matched into my surgical residency, a simple Tag Heuer, nothing extravagant, but the most important object I own. My clothes. My medical equipment. My laptop and the external drive with 17 years of financial records and professional documents. Everything I had brought into the marriage, I took out of it. Nothing that was ours. Nothing that could be contested. Nothing that would give anyone the ammunition to say I was taking something that wasn't mine. Waverly loaded the truck with the quiet efficiency of a man who has moved a lot of things in his life and understands that sometimes you just need to move. 2 hours. Then he was gone. I walked through the house one final time. It still looked like her house. Her furniture. Her artwork. The throw pillows she'd spent 3 weekends choosing. The kitchen where we'd had 1,000 ordinary meals. The back porch where I used to sit on summer mornings with coffee before heading to the hospital, watching the light come up over the yard. I had loved this life. I want to say that clearly because it's easy to assume that when someone walks away, they were never really in it. I was in it. I chose it. I fought for it in the quiet daily way that you fight for a marriage, by showing up, by being present, by working to be the kind of partner who makes someone's life better. But you cannot fight for something alone. And you cannot fight for something in a house where the terms of your belonging were decided before you walked in the door. I wrote the letter at the kitchen counter. Longhand. 1 page. Not in anger. I want to be precise about that, but with the same steadiness I bring to everything that matters. Darcy, I've thought carefully about what you said last night. You told me your family considers me lesser than your ex-husband, and that you didn't want to bring me to your brother's party to avoid awkwardness. You didn't tell me they were wrong. You didn't tell me you defended me. You told me you wanted to avoid awkwardness, which means you've decided their judgment is something to manage rather than something to reject. I understand now that I have spent 4 years trying to earn a seat at a table that was never going to be offered to me on my own terms. I am not willing to spend the next 40 years doing the same. I hope you find what you're looking for. I genuinely mean that. Ellison. I left it next to the coffee maker. I left my house key on top of it. I drove to the short-term apartment I'd booked that afternoon, a furnished unit in Germantown, the neighborhood just north of downtown Nashville, close enough to the hospital that I could walk in good weather. I sat on the edge of the bed in that empty apartment, and I did not feel like a man who had just destroyed his life. I felt like a man who had finally been honest about what his life actually was. Her mother called at 11:14 that night. I almost didn't answer. Then I thought, no, whatever this is, I'd rather face it directly. Ellison. Darcy just called me. She came home, and you're not there. Your things are gone. A pause. What happened? I said, I think you probably know what happened. A longer silence. I could hear voices in the background, the party winding down, or Lynette stepping outside to make this call in private. Darcy told me what she said to you. Another pause. I want you to know that isn't how I feel about you. Randall and I have always thought very highly of you, Ellison. I appreciate that, Lynette. I meant it. But I need to ask you something directly. Has anyone in your family ever said to Darcy, or anyone else, that they thought I wasn't good enough? That I was a step down from Preston? The pause this time was the longest of all. She didn't say yes. She also didn't say no. What she said was, families have complicated feelings when someone they love makes a choice that surprises them. I said, I see. Please don't do anything permanent, Ellison. Give Darcy a chance to explain. She loves you. I'm not angry at Darcy, I said. I'm not angry at anyone. I just needed to be honest about what I could live with. I thanked her for calling. I told her I hoped the rest of the party was enjoyable. And I ended the call. My phone buzzed 12 more times that night. Darcy texting. I read every single one. The first 3 were variations of where are you, call me. The 4th was I don't understand what happened. The 5th was I'm sorry, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. Number 6 through 9 were apologies that were really explanations, and explanations that were really justifications. My family is just traditional. Preston has known them for years. It's not a fair comparison. I love you. That's what matters. The 10th, this is an overreaction. The 11th, please come home. The 12th, I need you to call me. I didn't call. I turned off the light and slept better than I had in months. Over the following days, I learned something important about myself. I process by working. I went to the hospital every morning. I did my rounds. I saw my patients. I operated. And somewhere in the middle of that week, I noticed that the heaviness I'd been carrying for the past year or two, that low-level background sense of not quite being enough, not quite fitting, not quite landing, had lifted. I didn't know until it was gone how much weight I'd been carrying. Darcy reached out every day. Texts, calls, a long email she'd clearly spent significant time writing. She talked about counseling. She talked about wanting to understand what went wrong. She talked about the ways she had failed me. I read all of it. I want to say that because it matters. I didn't dismiss her. I didn't block her. I read every word. But I noticed something in the reading that told me everything I needed to know. In none of it did she say, my family was wrong. She said she was sorry for how she'd communicated it. She said she should have handled it differently. She said she hadn't meant for it to hurt me. But she never said they had no right to judge you that way. They were wrong. I should have told them that immediately, and I'm ashamed that I didn't. That absence was its own answer. Her father called 12 days after I left. Randall is a businessman, and the call had the texture of a negotiation. He said he respected me. He said Darcy was devastated. He said families go through rough patches, and he hoped I wouldn't make a permanent decision based on one difficult conversation. I said, Randall, do you think I'm a step down from Preston Wexford? He was quiet. Then, and I give him credit for this, he said, I think you're a different kind of man. Our family has a certain history with certain kinds of people. Preston fit into that in a way that was comfortable and familiar. I said, "That's not the same as no." "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it isn't." I thanked him for being honest. I told him I thought this particular chapter was closed. Garrett texted me about 3 weeks after everything, which surprised me. We'd never been particularly close. His message wasn't what I expected. The party wasn't my idea. My mom and Darcy decided between themselves. "I didn't know you weren't invited until that night. And I want you to know I said something to my mother about it, because what happened wasn't right." I texted back, "I appreciate that, Garrett. I mean it." He replied, "She loves you, for what it's worth. She's just been trying to be two things at once for a long time, and she's never figured out how to put them in the right order. Two things at once. A wife who loved me. A daughter who needed her family's approval. And when the moment came that she had to choose which one came first, she chose the one that didn't cost her anything." I don't say that with bitterness. I say it as a fact. It's the only honest way I know to look at it. The divorce was not clean, divorces never are. But it was not dramatic either. A mediator. Separate attorneys. We divided things fairly and without cruelty. The house sold in 3 weeks. Nashville real estate does not sit still. Darcy cried at the final mediation session. Real tears. The same tears she'd cried when I proposed on that rocky overlook in October with the mountains burning orange and red around us. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't feeling anything, but because I had already done my grieving in those first weeks in the Germantown apartment. Quietly alone, the way I've always processed hard things. When it was done, I walked out of the mediator's office on Church Street into one of those February days Nashville occasionally produces, cold enough to see your breath, sky so blue it almost hurts. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, and I felt the same thing I'd felt the night I left. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter than that. The specific peace of a person who has finally stopped pretending that I live in Germantown now. A 2-bedroom apartment with windows that face west toward the Cumberland River. The sun goes down over that water in the evenings in a way that is genuinely something. Last fall, I took a week off for the first time in 4 years and drove through the Smoky Mountains alone. I stayed in a cabin outside Gatlinburg for 3 nights. I hiked the Alum Cave Trail and sat on a rock above the clouds eating a granola bar and thinking about nothing in particular for about an hour. It was the best week I can remember in recent years. The last time I spoke to Darcy was 8 months after the divorce was finalized. A Tuesday evening. She said she'd been thinking about calling for a while. She said she was sorry, not in the mediation way, not in the midnight text way. Quietly, plainly. "I'm sorry for what I said, and for what it meant. You deserved better." I said, "Thank you, Darcy." She said, "I've been in therapy. I've been trying to understand how I could have loved you and still let that happen." "I think you loved me as much as you were able to at the time," I said. "I don't think you're a bad person. That's more generous than I probably deserve. Maybe. But it's honest." Before she hung up, she said, "I hope you find what you're looking for." I almost laughed, not unkindly, just because I'd said nearly those exact words to her in the letter I'd left next to the coffee maker. I said, "I think I already have. I'm finding it a little more every day." And that's true. That is simply, honestly, completely true. Here is what I want to say to whoever recognizes something in the story. Your worth is not determined by how you measure up to someone else's history. It is not set by the standards of a family that knew someone else first. It is not adjusted by how old the money is or how long the name has been in the county. I am an orthopedic surgeon. I repair the bones that let people walk, run, carry their children, live their lives. That is what I built. And it took me too long to stop quietly apologizing, in the way you apologize when you've accepted someone else's framing, for the fact that I built it differently than certain people expected. You do not have to earn your place in a room by being someone else. You do not have to compete with a ghost. You do not have to stay in a house where the terms of your belonging were settled without your input. The moment Darcy told me her family considered me lesser, the choice she made wasn't about one party. It was about which version of herself was going to show up, which loyalty was going to take priority, which things she was willing to defend. She made her choice. I respect it even now, in the way you respect a decision that hurt you when you understand it was honestly made. And I made mine. If this story hits somewhere real, drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more. And if you've ever stayed quiet while being slowly told you weren't enough, this one's for you. I'll see you next time.